The subcommittee will come to order as we begin our hearing on the Department of Energy's fiscal year 2021 budget request with respect to its environmental management, science, as well as the Arpa-E programs. Thank you to our witnesses for being here, and we apologize for some of us for being a few minutes late. We just did finish a series of votes. This is our committee's 5th hearing. As I've expressed in the last 4 hearings, I'm deeply disappointed in the administration's budget request. The deep cuts are unrealistic and will result in a failure to address our nation's most pressing challenges, including climate change and maintaining America's leadership in energy innovation. And surely the Trump budget utterly fails to meet our moral and legal obligations to the communities that helped our nation win World War II. The Department of Energy's Office of Environmental Management addresses the environmental legacy resulting from 5 decades of nuclear weapons production and government-sponsored nuclear energy research. EM is responsible for the cleanup of some of the world's most radioactive sites, a mission that is complicated and dangerous, but vital to ensuring clean soil, water, and air for many Americans now and for future generations. This unrealistic request proposes to cut EM by 19%, jeopardizing progress made on the remaining 16 sites, and we have some photos up there, while delaying several projects unnecessarily. These deep cuts translate into a moral and legal failure that we simply cannot accept. Similarly, the budget request proposes draconian cuts to the Office of Science, 17%, or $1.2 billion from last year's level. The Office of Science is an indispensable pillar of American leadership in science and technology, yielding over 100 Nobel Prizes. Every time I say that, 100 Nobel Prizes, and making key scientific advances ranging from creating solar energy systems and successive generations of batteries to inventing new materials and decoding DNA. We're just at the beginning of that age. Cuts of this magnitude will endanger America's leadership in technological innovation, economic progress, and I believe national security. Reflect for just this moment, on 100 Nobel Prizes. These accounts embrace the future, sustain a better life for all, and assure our national security on many fronts, including the unknown. Finally, the proposed elimination of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, Arpa-E, program is an absolute non-starter. Since its inception, Arpa-E has supported breakthrough technologies such as next-generation batteries, electric aviation, and improving components of solar panels. Arpa-E fills the gaps between basic and applied research where the private sector will not take on those financial risks. Just if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the #1 job in America now that remains unfilled would be solar installers. So the work of Arpa-E filters down to production platform ultimately. This is vital. This program, Arpa-E, is vital to innovation, and our nation should be investing more in science and engineering, not less. Our country's energy future depends on the Department of Energy's vital investments to solve our toughest energy challenges. The Trump budget request harms America's energy future, our competitiveness, our workforce, our consumers, and our economy. The Trump budget also falls short in meeting our obligations to the communities that have sacrificed and still bear the brunt of environmental costs born from winning World War II. We're in a new century. We got to fix that. With that, I'll close my remarks. Thank you, Dr. Fall, Mr. Janatowski, and Mr. White for being here today. And to Dr. Fall, thank you for visiting Ohio for our National Laboratory Day. It was a rewarding and very valuable conversation that is yielding real results. We look forward to discussing the Department's budget request and adapting it accordingly. I would like to turn to our able ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur. I'd like to join you in welcoming our witnesses to today's hearing. I believe it is the first time we will get to hear directly from all 3 witnesses on these programs, so we will try to make it so that you want to come back again. Yeah. I look forward to hearing about the priorities included in the fiscal year 2021 budget request for your respective programs, namely Environmental Management, Office of Science, and Arpa-E. Previous Department of Energy investments in basic science research have provided great benefits to our national economy, national security, and the everyday lives of our constituents. Just a few weeks ago, we had a hearing on DOE's work with NIH and others in the biomedical sciences, a topic that seems pretty relevant these days. The Advanced Energy Research Project, Energy, or Arpa-E, research and development projects are often described as high risk, high reward, and therefore something the private sector on its own is unlikely to pursue. By authorization, Arpa-E is tasked with accelerating transformational advances in energy technologies. The federal government also has a responsibility to clean up 5 decades of nuclear weapons development and production. This work is the mission of DOE's Environmental Management Program. Over the past decade, EM has made significant progress on cleaning up sites across the country, but there is still a heck of a lot of work to do. I think I can safely say that Congress will make some significant changes to this budget request for those programs as we have in the previous years. I look forward to the discussion with the witnesses to inform our work here on this committee. Chairwoman Chapter, again, thank you for calling this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. We will now turn to our witnesses. First, we will have Lane Janatowski, the Director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, Arpa-E. Prior to joining Arpa-E, Director Janatowski served as Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary for Science and in various private sector roles in the banking and energy sectors. Next, we will have Chris Fall, the Director of the Office of Science, and prior to his position, Mr. Fall served as Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary for Energy and Acting Director of Arpa-E, and as Acting Director of Arpa-E, and he's also served in a variety of roles at the Office of Naval Research. And finally, we will hear from Ike White, Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary of Science for Environmental Management. Prior to this role, Mr. White served as Chief of Staff and Associate Principal Deputy Administrator for the National Nuclear Security Administration. At NNSA, he also served as the Deputy Associate Administrator for Safety and Health and in a variety of leadership and technical positions. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Without objection, your written statements will be entered into the record. Please feel free to summarize your remarks in about 5 minutes each. And I want to thank again all of our committee members for being present today. And we apologize for making you wait about 10 minutes because we did have a series of votes. We would like to start with Director Janatowski.
Chairwoman Chapter and Ranking Member Simpson and members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me up here. It's an honor to appear. I'll get right into the 21 budget request and then move along. The President's proposal, a budget request, proposes no additional appropriations for Arpa-E for new projects. It requests $21.25 million for program direction regarding to existing projects, and requests a cancellation of any unobligated balances estimated to be $332 million. If this budget's approved, Arpa-E will not invest in any new technologies in 2021. However, approximately 350 projects which are ongoing will be carried out to completion or their cancellation if they don't meet their grant contracts. Arpa-E started in 2009, and since then, it's achieved some remarkable things. After following on $2.3 billion in appropriations, they got follow-on funding of $3.2 billion. That's about 150% of what was appropriated. So these are measures of indications of success that they have. 385 patents were issued, and 219 projects were carried along to other federal agencies. The success ratio is pretty good for what they do, where they focus on the TRL scale. In 2019, administering the last 2 or 3 months of the budget, when I got involved in July, we obligated $374 million, which was the highest obligation rate we ever had, and it's a testament to the staff that they could execute all the contracts and get them out the door to make sure we spent all the appropriations. One program in the 2019 budget that was approved was the Perform program. Renewable electric generating assets are actually not dispatched as highly as they could be by the system. This program is meant to address that, so when there are renewables available, they're given a risk score, like every other project is given a risk score under this program. We think using statistics and AI will get the renewable assets dispatched into the generating system, into the grid, more quickly and more assuredly. In 2020, I want to thank you all very much for the $425 million appropriation that we got. So far, we've announced $287 million of FOAs, which is about 75% of the year's work. So we're ahead on that score. They include several interesting programs. One is a fusion program, which we're cooperating with Director of Science Fall on fusion, and another program which is called Gemina, which directs itself to fission and has the target of using O&M, reducing O&M by 90% on new small modular reactors. Finally, I'd like to say that the personnel at Arpa-E are outstanding in my experience, consistent high quality, dedication. They'll go anywhere and work any hours that are required to get their projects done. One of the unique things is the program director position is filled by candidates 3 to 5 years at a time, so it requires a constant refresh of ideas, which always is interesting to hear the debates every other week in the office among the PDs, program directors, as to what they're focused on and what they're interested in. You've asked me to put some slides together, that is something from our Enlighten program, where we use photons for chips to communicate inside computers rather than wires. Photons are smaller than electrons, and there's a reduced heat factor and an increased speed factor. That's been a very popular. That little thing is a robot, and it goes through and identifies, it's called phenotyping. It identifies the qualities of plants automatically that will yield a higher crop yield in biofuels. And that's part of our REACT program. The next one is an electric motor that doesn't use any rare earths. And it has a performance factor at a comparable cost to regular motors. And as you can see there, or maybe you can't see, the team leader in that one was Baldur Corp. So kind of starting to be commercialized from the start. The next one is a battery. It's a large grid-level battery for storage. It's a flow battery, and it's based on iron. So it's readily available material in the United States, which is something that we tried to focus in on. The last thing is, it's difficult to say what that is, but that's a drill bit on the left, and inside the middle of the drill bit is a laser, and it's drilling for geothermal fluid. And what it does is the laser softens the rock, and the drill bit goes through. So it's more efficient in terms of getting to the rock. Quite often, geothermal reservoirs are capped by very hard rocks. They're high temperature, high pressure. And what this does, it makes the drill more efficient. That's the end of my prepared remarks. I'd like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have now or later.
We'll have a question period before I turn to Mr. Fall. Do you have anything to say about the portion of your testimony that deals with agricultural carbon management? You didn't mention it in your verbal testimony.
Well, no, I didn't. Let me see.
It's on page 3.
Oh, fine. Well, the little robot had to do with agricultural products in terms of growing biofuel more efficiently and phenotyping them to get better types of products. Oh, Smart Farm. Beg your pardon. My first time. I'm a little nervous.
Oh, it doesn't show. I mean, you know so much. I'm just glad for the photos. You're making Arpa-E real
Thanks
for
very
our
much.
members and for the country.
Smart Farm bioreactors process fuel, and then they send it biorefineries, and they send it to fuel refineries to be mixed in as ethanol. So to the extent that they are told there's a certain carbon capture level in the, it's a national level. And what the Smart Farm tries to do is to make the carbon capture nature of the particular agricultural product localized to the region. So if your region has soybeans that capture more carbon or sequester more carbon or use less carbon, we measure it in the soil. And that program has to do with basically quantifying the carbon so the farmers can get paid more for what's stored in the soil. And it's place by place. Indiana or Illinois or Ohio have different levels of carbon in the soil. Now a national level is used, and we're trying to get a specific level for a farm used so that people get more money for it. It'll be a more cash crop, and it'll grow more of it.
Well, that is a whole long conversation that we should have both before the committee and then maybe a private briefing, because you are into something that struck right to my aorta, I'll tell you. That is vital. I've just returned from the Salton Sea, and anyway, that's a long conversation.
First geothermal project was on the Salton Sea.
We need you there more. Thank you very much, so much, Mr. Janikowski. Mr. Fall.
Ma'am, we have some pretty exciting things in the Office of Science. I'm not sure that we have a laser drill. I think I want the laser drill. Thank you, Chairwoman Capter, Ranking Member Simpson, and distinguished members of the committee. It really is a privilege to be here and represent the Office of Science before you today. The fiscal year 2021 budget request for the Office of Science will ensure continued U.S. leadership in basic physical sciences, our core responsibility, and continued support for the underpinnings of our nation's technological and economic future. We're requesting support for investments in new and ongoing administration initiatives, as well as continued support for basic research, for construction and operation of our major scientific user facilities, and to renew and modernize the critical infrastructure of the national laboratories. Just a few examples, our integrated computational and data infrastructure for scientific discovery will dramatically shorten the time it takes to do ambitious experiments, analyze the results, make computational predictions, and then flow those results back to new experiments. This is transformative, in my opinion. The Next Generation Biology Initiative will allow us to move from the genomics and biochemistry of biological systems we work on now toward the development of bio-inspired, biohybrid, and biomimetic systems that will bolster biotechnology as an industry of the future. Our Separation Science Initiative will radically improve the extraction of rare earth minerals and help achieve supply chain independence for these critical materials. And the same underlying science applies to carbon capture technology. Separation science applies equally to carbon capture and to rare earth elements. We'd like to revolutionize polymer upcycling by developing the technologies for moving discarded plastics up the value chain instead of down the value chain. Building on the pilot cancer moonshot, we'd like to accelerate data and computational collaboration with the National Institutes of Health. Our data handling, our supercomputers, and our expertise is something the NIH uses already. We would like to expand that. One of the Office of Science's most significant contributions to science, medicine, industry, and national security over the decades has been particle accelerator science and technology. The Strategic Accelerator Technology Initiative will focus on innovation and technology transfer that will build up our domestic supply chain for these critical dual-use technologies, and we're closely partnering with the National Nuclear Security Administration on that effort. And finally, and interestingly, we propose to begin the work of connecting our national laboratories with an entangled quantum network, a backbone that we believe will lay the foundation for a commercial national quantum network. Those are new initiatives we're proposing for 21. We ask for continued support for ongoing priority initiatives, including artificial intelligence, quantum information sciences in response to your legislation, the Exascale Computing Initiative, microelectronics innovation, biosecurity, isotopes, and enhancing the domestic U.S. fusion program. I'd just like briefly to call your attention to the effort we've made at the department to better coordinate with other programs outside of the Office of Science. Secretary Brewer stood up the Research Technology Investment Committee, or RTIC, with just this purpose, to coordinate technology work across the whole department. The Office of Science now participates in grand challenge efforts such as grid-scale storage and battery cycling that are just the result of the Secretary's direction to work together as one team on these priority initiatives. In closing, I just want to say again how privileged and frankly proud I am to represent the Office of Science before you today. The career team at headquarters at Forrestal, including what I think to be the best budget officer in the federal government, the phenomenal scientific and engineering talent in our laboratories, and the incredible world-unique machines we built for discovery really represent the most capable science and technology enterprise in the world. This proposed budget will allow the Department of Energy to continue to leverage our technology superpowers, science at scale, the convergence of the disciplines, and these remarkable user facilities we support to solve the great scientific questions of our time, to effectively address the great human challenges of our time, and to provide for economic opportunity and better lives for our citizens. So thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Mr. Fall, what are we looking at there with that blinking light?
That is the quantum loop. That's the first stage of this quantum network connecting Argonne National Laboratory. I think that's about, it's listed up there, 26 miles, so a 52-mile round loop. We're going to build this out to connect all of our national laboratories, this entangled quantum network, fundamentally different from the internet. And then we're hopeful, just like what happened with ARPANET, DARPA's original internet, the commercial sector will pile on top of that and use that backbone as a way to build a commercial quantum network.
Thank you very much. Mr. White.
Chairwoman Capter, Ranking Member Simpson, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate your support for the Department of Energy's environmental management mission, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Throughout the 30-year history of EM, many sites have been cleaned up and closed, transitioning from waste sites to wildlife refuges, wetland preserves, and job-creating economic development hubs. Over the past 9 months that I've been on the job, I've had the opportunity to see cleanup progress firsthand at sites like Hanford and Idaho, Oak Ridge. I know many of you have as well, since I met a couple of you in your districts at events to celebrate the progress we were making at those sites. The fiscal year 21 budget request enables EM to continue building upon that success and enable further cleanup progress. A key focus of the request is tackling one of EM's largest challenges, tank waste. Not only does tank waste account for one of our largest environmental risks, it also accounts for 60% of our total environmental liability and 40% of our annual budget. After decades of preparation and support from this committee, EM has reached an inflection point with Savannah River Salt Waste Processing Facility coming online this year and ramping up operations in fiscal year 21. SWPF will eventually enable EM to process up to 10 million gallons per year of tank waste and accelerate the mission at Savannah River to finish in just 10 to 15 years. The request also supports initiating operations at the Integrated Waste Treatment Unit in Idaho to enable EM to treat the remaining tank waste in Idaho in the next 5 to 10 years. Hanford also remains a top priority, representing nearly 1/3 of the entire request. The request focuses on completing and commissioning the facilities and infrastructure needed for the direct feed low-activity waste system to enable initiation of tank waste treatment by the end of 2023. Collectively, these capabilities represent a fundamental shift for the program from completing long-running construction projects to a solid commencement of tank waste treatment operations. To put the scope of what we will achieve with these new capabilities in perspective, we've treated about 16 million gallons of tank waste to date for the program. With SWPF and IWTU and DFLAW online, we will be able to process that same amount of tank waste in under 2 years. In addition to prioritizing the tank waste mission, Madam Chairwoman, the request will enable continued progress across EM, modernizing infrastructure at the waste isolation pilot plant so it can continue to play a vital role for DOE and EM for years to come, completing the removal of targeted buried waste at Idaho, continuing slab and soil remediation at Oak Ridge's East Tennessee Technology Park, continuing demolition of the first enrichment process building at Portsmouth. EM has a lot planned for fiscal year 21, and I'm confident in the ability of our talented and dedicated federal and contractor workforce to get it done. To strengthen our ability to achieve continued success, we're also pursuing a set of strategic initiatives. They include strengthening project management, expanding new contracting mechanisms to encourage innovation and reduce government costs. We'll also continue a science-driven and risk-informed approach to cleanup. And with the safety record that's well ahead of other comparable industries, we will continue embracing a safety-first culture. As someone who has spent most of my 30-year career focused on the safety of nuclear operations, this is particularly important to me. So in closing, I would like to thank you and the members of the committee for your support of the EM mission. I know a number of you have EM sites in your districts or at your states. As Congress works to complete a final budget, I look forward to working with you to meet the federal government's moral and ethical responsibility to complete the EM mission. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. White, and all of you for your statements. As a reminder for those members present in the room when I gavel in at the beginning of the hearing, I'll recognize you for the questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority until all who arrive prior to the gavel have asked questions. And for those who arrived after the hearing has started, I'll recognize those members solely in order of arrival, again alternating between majority and minority. And lastly, I intend to observe as best we can the 5-minute rule for questions and answers, and we'll now begin questioning under our normal rules. Dr. Fall, obviously the coronavirus 19 is in the news and at the forefront. But most people probably don't realize that the Department of Energy's national labs are contributing to scientific solutions. For example, and I hold a story here I'll make part of the official record, from the Chicago Tribune about the Argonne Lab. And we know that the Department of Energy's X-ray light sources are used to image proteins of the virus, like those shown on the screen. And those can reveal and target sites for antiviral drugs and assist in vaccine development. Could you please tell us what Department of Energy assets are already being used, and what capabilities do DOE scientists possess in their user facilities to offer biomedical solutions and suggestions to our biomedical community with respect to the coronavirus 19?
Thank you for your question, Chairwoman Capter. And as you know, as I think you all know already, generally no other agency builds X-ray light sources. So we build these things. We operate them on behalf of the country, on behalf of academic researchers, and certainly on behalf of the National Institutes of Health. Here's an example, the story in particular that you mentioned. We have a number of these light sources. They're all capable of doing this kind of work, crystal characterization of crystals, of proteins. This is taking a picture of the coronavirus, understanding how it's put together, and in the case of the potential drug interventions, figuring out how to interrupt how that virus is put together inside of cells. That's one example. However, there's a whole computational side of that same question. So researchers are using our supercomputers to model the coronavirus, to model and predict. So here we're taking pictures and doing an experiment on the coronavirus. We can also predict using databases of, using the structure of the coronavirus and databases of drugs, what might work, so that we can then go back, talked earlier about that interaction between computation and experiment, prediction and validation. So both of those are happening at our DOE labs. And then the third component of this is epidemiological modeling. So how fast could the disease spread, and what factors influence the spread of that disease? That's a big computational challenge. We're doing that as well. We can do genome, as you know, we have a whole part of my organization oriented to understanding genes, genomics, sequencing, and so forth. That's another area of expertise. So across the board, a lot of opportunity here. I can't remember if the story mentioned this particular factor, but in fact, we were on a shutdown of the APS when the coronavirus outbreak started. We ended up using our resources to restart that facility 2 weeks early in order to get those crystals on the machine and take those pictures. So it's a great story.
In view of some of the apprehension of the public and obviously our need to know how to help the public, any progress you make on that, thinking how to communicate that would be very valuable to our members. So I just urge you, to follow that closely and to let us know.
Thank you, ma'am. And the labs have come together as a team. We have a working group meeting several times per week on the existing work going on and future opportunities for how we can help. So that's being very well coordinated with the White House, with HHS. We're connected to all the groups working on this. So the agencies understand that we're available and organized to be a resource as needed.
Thank you so much. Mr. Janikowski, I really appreciated your testimony, and I want to just go back, and this will be my last question for this series. We will go to the other members. But on agricultural carbon management, that topic fascinates me because I represent a region of the country where Lake Erie, the southernmost of the Great Lakes, is the drain for the largest watershed in the entire Great Lakes, and Lake Erie is sick. And the only way we can cure it is by having a very, very concerted effort in the vast watershed it drains to understand soil science and which plants, for example, we're a major soybean bowl, to plant between the soybean rows, to have a lot of plants with roots that absorb the excess legacy nitrogen and phosphorus that's in the soil, and also some other matter that's spread on the soil, be it fertilizer or manure, to prevent drainage into the lake. The land is not managed that way now, and I'm wondering maybe we want to invite you out to Ohio. And I've just returned from Southern California and looked at the Salton Sea. That's a drain too. I think the Everglades, though, our dear Congresswoman Frankel has just stepped out for a minute. If we look at what's happening there because of sugar beets, you've got Salton Sea draining the Imperial Valley. You've got Lake Erie draining the Western Basin. It's Western Basin. You've got the Everglades. You've got examples across this country where the relationship between carbon management and water health is direct. And but we don't yet have, through the agricultural natural resource science offices over at the Department of Agriculture, we don't really have. We have a lot of well-intentioned objectives, but we really don't have the science yet for regenerative soils and those that hold carbon and reward farmers who use those practices. What enlightenment could you give us? What could your office provide to regions like this that are truly facing a frightful situation with the pollution of their water from agricultural practices?
Beg your pardon. Our Roots program is directly related to that, where we're trying to get the roots to grow deeper and keep more in the soil, carbon, keep more fertilizer so it doesn't run off. We're mostly now in the combination of the stage of measuring to reward the farmers, and the Roots program is in the stage of trying to redesign and type the plants that are most successful at that. So once we get the two of those combined, I think that's something that can be rolled out and let private initiative take care of the farmers, give them more money for what they do, for what they naturally do. Use fewer fertilizers, keep it in the soil better, and reward them for capturing the carbon, so not only do they do what you want in terms of capturing carbon, but they get paid more for it.
All right, you have an open invitation to call my office and bring your people over. And I'll invite some of my
I will do
me
that.
who face similar problems
I appreciate the
in their own
invitation.
regions. Thank you very much. Mr. Simpson.
Let me just say, let me correction first. It's sugar cane down there. Sugar beets are good.
sorry.
They're
That's
growing in
the
Idaho.
sugar-
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
sugar beets are good. Remember that. I would like to yield my 5 minutes to Mr. Calvert, who has a defense hearing at 3 o'clock. So,
I thank the gentleman, and Madam Chair, I'm glad you were in Southern California, Salton Sea. I haven't. George Brown was the first chairman of the Salton Sea Authority, and then he died, and then Sonny Bono was the second, and he died, and then they made me the third, and I said I got to get out of this job, and Mary Bono took that. Now Raul, I think, is the chairman of the Salton Sea. So a long history down there. Worked on the first power facility down there with Congressman Vic Vesey, God, back in the early 70s when he was Secretary of the Army. And it's not very far, Madam Chair, from my hometown. It's very famous. You may have heard of it. It's Corona, California. That's why we referred to this disease as COVID-19, not Corona. My question is, I've been around a long time, and we've been talking about fusion for a long, long time. And it's always the silver bullets is just around the corner. and, worked with a lot of companies, and it is the silver bullet. It solves a lot of problems. You can figure it out. And, Lockheed now claims that they have an idea that I'm going to go down to the Skunk Works to take a look at it. They have a roll-off. They think they're a number of years away. I have a friend over at Caltech says that's a bunch of malarkey. There's a lot of, these physicists, they all argue amongst each other like economists. So I'd like to get an understanding. Can you provide us an update on where we're at in the development of fusion, and where are we going?
Well, search just around the corner.
Yeah.
Well, as I think you're aware, and my boss, actually, the Undersecretary for Science, was just out at Lockheed just last week looking at that, and they, I wouldn't bet against Lockheed. They've done some remarkable things at the Skunk Works. But what's interesting about that is that, yes, as you know, we're funding and associated with the large fusion project in the south of France, ITER. But in the meantime, what's happened is it's not just Lockheed. There's a whole bunch of these startup companies now who are developing innovative technologies for fusion, and smart money. This is not federally funded. This is money that is privately raised, and so we're hopeful that we'll have the flexibility while continuing to participate in ITER, and there are a lot of benefits to that, to also supporting this domestic fusion industry that's growing. Uniquely in this country, a little bit is going on in Canada. There's a lot of opportunity there, and the difference really is that ITER is based on, got started quite a while ago and is based on relatively legacy technology. These new startup companies are taking advantage of all the magnet technologies that have evolved, for example, superconducting magnets and so forth, that is the reason that they can do this more cheaply and in a more compact way. So timeline couldn't weigh in on that, but it is promising. I think we understand we're going to get there.
Well, that would it would solve everything if you're able to where we could actually use fusion in a massive scale, because we'd have the waste product.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Save everything but your water problem.
Well, maybe we can develop. We have energy. We can desalt the sea.
There you go.
Salt in the sea. Okay. Thank you.
Congressman Kirkpatrick has kindly allowed Congressman Kilmer to precede her here. I want to thank her.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Congressman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague. Director Fall, I mentioned to the Secretary recently that I really appreciated you coming out to my district last year to see the Marine Sciences Lab in person. The high-level attention that you and that your colleagues are giving this laboratory, including making sure DOE has an enduring presence in the community by finalizing the land acquisition this year, is really appreciated. As you know, one of the primary areas of basic research that's conducted at the Marine Sciences Lab is focused on understanding coastal ecosystem dynamics and their resilience in the face of a rapidly changing climate and a growing population that puts a greater demand on that ecosystem. I guess a couple questions. One, based on what you learned during your recent visit, I'd love to hear from you more about the role you think the Marine Sciences Lab can play in supporting programs within the Office of Science. And then secondly, what support do you need from this committee, from Congress, to help you fully utilize the unique capabilities and expertise that the Marine Science Lab has?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I was thrilled to visit. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it together. I know we had talked about doing that. What we've done, as you suggested, or as you said, last year was to finalize the land purchase. That was a significant investment and a heavy lift to get that on solid footing. We do have opportunities, as you suggested, the science through BER, the interface between marine and terrestrial ecosystems, very important question, a lot of opportunity there. As you know, there's a lot of advanced energy work that goes on at SQUIM, and that's not funded by my office, it's funded by EERE. But the basic premise holds there. I'm not a big fan, as I've, I think, said publicly, in single-purpose laboratories, and I think the opportunity for SQUIM is to diversify that, and yes, programs within the Office of Science, but also make that available across the agencies and you know, clear through the policy knots that make it difficult for them to fund things going on at SQUIM. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Very much so, and I would just offer our continued partnership as we look at fully leveraging that lab and its capabilities.
Thank you, sir. And I will, you know, I'm quite confident that Director Ashby at PNNL shares the vision of figuring out how we can leverage this unique, completely unique asset in our DOE
He does,
lab
and
system.
he's got a terrific team, some amazing people working there in SQUIM. So.
Correct.
Director Genatowski, I want to start by saying I share the disappointment expressed by many of my colleagues that the administration is once again proposing elimination of Arpa-E. I imagine you must be equally disappointed here, sitting here testifying on a budget that would eliminate your role. Thankfully, Congress, I think, has shown strong bipartisan support for the growing investments in Arpa-E, in part because of the vital role it plays in basic research and development, developing next-generation renewable technologies. We've seen it in my state. These funds have supported efforts to modernize the power grid, to harness energy from new non-carbon resources, algae-based biofuels, fusion energy, that will help us retain our energy, regain our energy independence. I guess my questions for you, one, can you talk about how Arpa-E and other DOE programs are working to make sure these technologies have a pathway to commercialization? And secondly, are there other DOE programs that support this kind of work? It seems like Arpa-E is uniquely punching above its weight on that front.
Well, thank you for saying we're punching above our weight. What we've done is the Arpa-E had a program before I got there called Tech to Market. And it starts with the original proposals of all the scientists for a program that they have to have a reasonable or a colorable path to market for one of their items. We work on electric airplanes. We've got 2 programs that I authorized since I've been in office. And on each of those programs, I waited until I was fairly well assured that not only would the science work, but the cost per available seat mile would be lower than the revenue per available seat mile, because that's the key criteria for an airline to purchase aircraft. I banked airlines for about 5 years when I was working as a banker. So I know that's the key metric, and I waited until they would give me that information before I let it go forward. So that's being incorporated more and more and expected more and more of the scientists, not to impede what they're doing, but more to guide what they're doing into a useful path so they can, I always say, get on the loading dock and get into the environment. Otherwise, it's, you know, a term paper, so to speak. We're going through a reorganization now of 2 things, interfacing with larger corporates, with big R&D budgets, to not so much public-private partnerships are one thing, but to educate us as to what the needs are of the marketplace. What does the market need? Not incrementally, but what does the market need in a revolutionary sense? And help to inform our researchers when they try to propose projects as to what they propose. So that's ongoing, and there's, I see I have 50 seconds left, so another thing we do is we've got...
I'm in overtime, so we're in the whole 50 seconds, sorry.
I'm out.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Congressman Kilmer. Congressman Simpson.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm kind of perplexed, frankly. I was always taught that you kind of reward success and punish failure. And yet you are all sitting here saying we are doing such a great job in Arpa-E, finding out new things, great job in sciences, we're doing such a great job in cleanup, please cut our budget. Frankly, that doesn't make any sense to me. And in fact, it's not only in Arpa-E that we're doing such a great job finding these technological things and doing all this kind of stuff, please eliminate us. I got to believe it's hard for you to sit here with this budget request. And I doubt very seriously that this committee is going to go along with the budget request. And hopefully, I think we can have a 302B where we can address the deficiencies that are in this budget that are seen both by Republicans and Democrats. Let me ask you, Mr. White, if at this budget level, do you think you can meet all the settlement agreements with the states?
At this budget level, we can meet all of our near-term agreements with the settlement agreement at Idaho. We will be on track to ship to Wipp, as we've committed to do, to the state of Idaho, and we're also on track to start up IWTU by the end of this calendar year.
What about the settlement agreements with other states?
In the short term, I think we can meet all of our milestones. Certainly, deferring work in the short term makes milestones that are in out years a little more difficult.
Okay. You've recently, let me get to it. Earlier this week, the department released a document titled EM Vision 2020-2030, A Time for Transition and Transformation. What are there a couple of key points you'd like us to take away from this document?
So for me, there are a couple of key points. As you probably know, one of the things that GAO has recommended that EM do is do a better job of integrating how we look at the environmental cleanup program across the entire program and not just on a site-by-site basis. So for me, this is an opportunity for us to lay out for the first time in recent history what the EM program looks like across the board at all of our sites. I think it's important for us to continue to make the case that we made earlier related to the progress that we've made with the investments that you have given us over the past couple of years. I think it's important for you and for the folks in the communities where we're doing cleanup and for the American people to understand that we're actually making effective use of those cleanup resources. And so laying that out and demonstrating that is very important to me. It's also the first piece in what will be a larger effort to improve our overall integration and planning. So it's also important to note this is a one-year document. What it reflects is the budget that Congress has enacted in the current year, and it reflects what we see going forward for the next 10 years based on the proposal. But as we go through the 22 planning cycle and as Congress enacts the 21 budget, this is something that I intend to update every year to reflect both the progress that we're making with the enacted budget and what we hope to get done over the next decade.
Thank you. Director Fall, the budget request includes several cross-cutting initiatives both across program offices within the department and across sub-programs within the Office of Science. The cross-cutting approach can help avoid duplication of effort while also bringing all relevant expertise to a problem, but it must be managed appropriately. How can the Office of Science ensure the effectiveness of these cross-cutting initiatives? And does each initiative have specific goals and milestones, and are resources and competencies clearly aligned toward those goals and milestones?
Thank you, sir. As I did mention, the leadership on this really is coming from the Secretary. Actually, it was before he became Secretary, he instantiated this RTIC concept that's led to the cross-cutting department-wide programs. They're very well organized. They include Arpa-E, Office of Science, the applied offices,
It
and
won't
so
include
forth.
Arpa-E very long if we follow this budget.
Potentially, sir, yes. Thank you for letting me trip myself up there. But within the Office of Science, this is my own priority. I come at this, and I talk to my team about it all the time, where I prefer them to be a chorus rather than a group of soloists, and we're working towards that. But I want to offer it's not just about the program. As I think you understand, in order to do what we do, to get money out the door, to support the laboratories, to support the universities, there's a legal component, there's a contracting component, there are all sorts of bits and pieces of this machinery. And what we're doing uniquely now, when we put out a funding opportunity, we've just prototyped this for the first time with your Quantum Center, FOA, is to bring all those people together and attack it as an integrated team. All these people at once, instead of sending around the department 10 different times. This makes common sense. You'd think we'd be doing that. We are doing it now. So it's not just about coordinating on the programs and the scientific objectives. It's actually coordinating on the business processes that go into that as well. And I think that's a great success story.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Certainly. Congresswoman Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here to testify. And I especially want to thank you, Director Janatowski, for meeting with me yesterday, discussing the innovative research that's coming out of Arpa-E, especially the groundbreaking research that you're doing with solar technology out of the University of Arizona, my alma mater. So I do appreciate what you're doing with batteries, energy storage, new solar technology development. So thank you very much. Instead of this administration's continued attempts to shut down Arpa-E entirely, I'm really interested in increasing the department's ability to fund early-stage energy research and advance U.S. energy security and economic competitiveness. How is Arpa-E coordinating with other departments of energy offices, working with the private sector, or developing new internal programs to make sure that the technologies that have received previous support have a pathway to commercialization?
Thank you very much for that question. We coordinate with a number of different departments and different agencies. We can coordinate with Director Fall here on a fusion program, which we've just put out together. We work with NASA in their Ohio facility quite a lot on electric aviation. They're going to be a test bed for our work. We're talking with them, and in point of fact, they're going to be on our merit review board when proposals finally come in. In terms of the Department of Defense, we coordinate with them on many programs. So we do have, and I said 219 programs are handed off to other offices. For example, EERE takes many of our programs and moves them the next step along the technical chain, if you will. In terms of how do I coordinate with them on commercialization, again, we have the tech-to-market professionals who have to have a mid-course, a first-course correction when they put their proposals up, that they have a colorable title to getting to market, then a mid-course correction, and then a final report. We're always on top of them, looking at what they're doing. We have what we call active management, which is different from the other programs, where the program directors and their assistants visit the programs, and if they have problems, they guide them, they turn them, and they try to focus them on successful science and science that will end up on the loading dock, if you will.
Can you give me a little bit of a timeline on the course correction? How long does it take to actually make that change and get it up and running?
Sometimes there was a program we had called SLIPS, which was to reduce resistance inside of a pipeline. It morphed. It wouldn't work inside of a natural gas pipeline, but it morphed into something that now goes onto the bottom of ships. Just the application changed. Some of the formulas changed. So instead of bottom paint, they put slips on, and it decreases the fuel use of ocean-going transports, and that's an example of a mid-course correction. How long does it take? Some things happen more quickly. Some things we might think of as a failure, and they might happen 20 years later. It's just very hard to tell. Our general commercialization rate is somewhere around 4% of the properties, 5%, which is significantly higher within the gambit that we get the information, which is the term of the grant plus 5 years after the grant.
Can you address specifically what you're doing with University of Arizona, especially regarding solar?
Well, if you give me a moment, I could.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Instead of eating up your time, if you'll give me a moment to get back to you.
You can get back to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Went to the University of Arizona, and I live in Tucson, and so just interested. But you can follow up with me after the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Congressman Simpson? Oh, excuse me. Congressman Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. Gentlemen, I just want to say thank you I have worked with each and every one of you all and your respective agencies within the Department of Energy, and I think you're doing an exemplary job, not only for the department, but for our country. As you know, I have the privilege of representing Oak Ridge, the Oak Ridge Reservation. I think that's rather rhetorical. Yeah, I was going to say it. And I have some very distinguished competitors on this dais, sometimes even on my side of the aisle. Now you know I'm so good to the chair. But having said that, we are doing tremendous work, and our commitment is to work with you through this budget process. I will say that. A couple of questions. Mr. White, as you know, I'm the chair of the Nuclear Cleanup Caucus. I represent a major EM site, the Oak Ridge Reservation, and I take very seriously the federal government's responsibility to remove nuclear, radioactive, and other hazardous waste materials from communities like Oak Ridge and other communities around the country. Our colleagues on this committee have agreed with me in the past and have consistently funded work for the disposition of U-233 in Oak Ridge. What is the department's commitment to dealing with U-233? What is your plan with that? And I'll just let you answer that question, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that opportunity to talk about our uranium-233 disposition program. I know you and I were together back in November in Oak Ridge, and I appreciate your support of the Cleanup Caucus. I also noted that you brought members with you from Illinois and from Nebraska to see not just the laboratory, but also our cleanup work, so I thank you for that. With respect to our U-233 program, I think that is one of the highlights of our cleanup program, and it's an isotope that we've spent decades spending money to store until we can dispose of it in a safe and effective manner. And I think we found a way, as we talked about in November, to be able to not only dispose of the material safely, but also do it in a way that saves the taxpayers money and makes some of the material available for life-saving medical research. I think that's a very important program to EM. I think that's a benefit to the country at large, and I'm very much committed to that path forward for disposition.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Fall. As I told Secretary Brewer a couple of weeks ago, I'm very excited about the plans for the construction of a second target station at the Spacian neutron source. And in our last budget, I think we actually funded the beginning research for that. It's going to enable wholly new capacities to examine the structure and dynamics of materials from polymers to proteins to catalysts, and it's also going to double the capacity of the current SNS, which is oversubscribed now by a factor of 3, sir. Project is critical to maintaining U.S. leadership in neutron sciences, and I'm thankful that Congress provided $37 million to complete the conceptual design in fiscal 20 and ready the project for CD1 review at the start of construction. Secretary Brewer said that he anticipated the department making a decision about CD1 by the end of this year or in the first quarter of next year. From your perspective, is everything on track within the Office of Science and BES to meet this timeline, sir?
Yeah, well, everything's on track, sir. The time will depend on, of course, on the level of appropriation. We do have quite a lot of money that's been appropriated for the SNS, and we're committed to the project, as you suggested, and relative to the chairwoman's earlier question. This is the second target station is uniquely suited for biological work, such as with the NIH. As I understand it, the bulk of the money that we got in the last appropriation is engineering and construction money that cannot actually be used for the planning process that we are undergoing now to CD1. So, if we could get back to you on that, maybe we could work with you to shift some things around a little bit so that we can get through CD1 and then move on to the construction of the project.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your defining that. That's very helpful, sir. Quick question. My time is running short, but on medical isotopes, Dr. Fall, we committed in this subcommittee a proposal by the Office of Science to invest in the research and production of stable isotopes, and the department is requesting additional resources for this purpose in fiscal 21. Isotopes, both radioisotopes and stable isotopes for medical or industrial applications, are one of the areas where DOE, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and other national labs have had an incredible impact. including saving lives of billions of people and millions of people, and having a $1 billion impact on the U.S. economy. Dr. Fall, can you speak what's driving the investment by the department, and can you provide us a status report on the Stable Isotope Production and Research Center, and when do you expect CD1, sir?
And I apologize, I'm going to have to get back to you on CD1 exactly, but boy, as you suggested, we've identified this as a priority. We're committed to it. Oak Ridge, yes. FRIB at Michigan State, and other facilities producing the isotopes. Most Americans don't understand that the isotopes that are, most Americans probably don't think about medical isotopes, but don't understand that the medical isotopes that are not commercially produced are all provided by the U.S. Department of Energy. I could also follow up with you later about some changes we're doing structurally within my office to bolster the isotope program, to carve it out and lift it up and get it more in a production mindset. Right now, it's very closely tied to research. We think that giving that the talent that's oriented more towards production and business and sustainability is the right thing to do. In addition to these facilities, to increase the capacity of that program.
Thank you very much, sir, and gentlemen, I wish you the best in your endeavors. My time's up. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Congressman Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member. Gentlemen, welcome to the committee. Express my thanks to you as well for all the great work that you and your folks do on behalf of our country. And like Mr. Simpson said, we hope you do well enough to come back, and we would welcome you back. I wanted to talk a little bit about, at least in the first round of questioning, focus on the environmental cleanup efforts, Department of Energy. So, Mr. White, if I could just talk to you just for a little bit here. As was mentioned earlier, you released your strategic vision, I think just this past Monday. I'm aware that for the past several years, the Government Accountability Office has been highlighting concerns about, I guess what we could term a lack of a clear program-wide strategy with better reporting to address the growing environmental cleanup liability. And I think that's fair to say. A significant portion of that liability lies at the Hanford Reservation, as you know. First, let me commend you on heeding the GAO's input for your work on drafting this, what would be a starting point for the development of a strategic vision. Some of the document includes important priorities at the Hanford Reservation, particularly the department's commissioning of the waste treatment plant, so that we can finally begin to vitrify the low-activity waste, which is very important. It's truly a high priority that we're all committed to, so thank you for that. But I got to say that there are several concerns that arise from this document, or generally the strategy that's laid out. So let me address those concerns first. From what I can tell, there would be essentially no work done conducted on the waste encapsulation and storage facility, or the WESIP. And if I could recall a comment made by the department not that long ago, but they considered the work being done there and the pool that the capsules are stored in to be the greatest risk in the nationwide DOE complex for serious accident. So it concerns me that there's no work scheduled to be done if we stick with this report. Also, there would essentially be no work conducted at the 296 waste site, or under the work that's being looked at completing to clean up under the 324 building. Certainly concerned there. That is literally yards from the Columbia River, as you know. And also, I believe there's vital risk mitigation work that needs to go on with groundwater remediation, the dewatering of the K basins, building demolition. There's just a lot of things that are concerning that show up in this report. Now, I fully realize that there's constraints based upon the President's budget requests. I appreciate that. But what I want to make clear to people at home, the people that are on the committee, the DOE officials, certainly that my work here and the work of my colleagues, and certainly the colleagues in the Senate, including Senator Murray, is all to ensure one thing, that we do not allow this budget request to become reality for the cleanup across the EM or certainly at the Hanford site. That just can't be. You could walk up to almost any person on the street in the Tri-Cities and ask them a question about the federal government's responsibility at Hanford. I heard the words ethical and moral, but there's one other word that would be, I think you would hear from people in the Tri-Cities, and that's the legal responsibility for the federal government to complete this cleanup work. So I just want to bring up those concerns. I wanted to let you address those. So Mr. White, could you assure me that the Department of Energy, DOE, is still committed to the important cleanup efforts at Hanford? And then if you could, please feel free to respond to the greater matter of the strategic vision and its relationship to the budget. And I know you mentioned some things about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but updating the report as we move forward.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the important work that we do at Hanford as well as our strategic vision document. A couple of things. First, on the important work that we do at Hanford. The department remains committed to all of the cleanup work that we need to do in the environmental legacy that we have at Hanford, and that includes all of the projects that you laid out. The fact that our budget may not have been able to fit everything for the current fiscal year within the top line that reflects a broader set of national priorities does not mean that we're not committed to getting it done, and we are committed to getting it done whenever funding becomes available to do that work. In terms of the strategic vision, it does reflect the priorities laid out in the President's budget request, but it has to be a living document because the budget process itself is a living process. And as we go forward, it needs to be updated on an annual basis to reflect not just the previous year's proposal, but also the budget that's passed by Congress and that we're enacting in the course of the current year. And I intend to do that.
I appreciate that. And I look forward to continue working with you as well. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fall, the department's long history and leadership in supporting basic science has resulted in biomedical innovations and applications, some of which you've referenced, all of which have enabled future breakthroughs in health research. Some of these include drug discovery, high-precision imaging to advance precision, brain and nerve mapping, cancer detection, and cancer treatment. In a recent hearing held by this subcommittee, we learned that over 90% of new drugs approved by the FDA between 2010 and 2016 used the Department of Energy's light sources as an essential part of their drug development. Could you perhaps enlighten us, if you can, on what are the most promising areas of biomedical research that might benefit from more collaboration between the Department of Energy, the National Institutes of Health, and other federal agencies like the VA and the DOD in their medical arenas?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for the question, because I think it's as you suggested, it's a great story of collaboration, existing work, and I do want to let you know that we took the SEAB report, Secretary of Energy Advisory Board report on NIH DOE collaboration very seriously, and every one of my deputy program leads has now met with counterparts at the National Institutes of Health to look for additional opportunities. As you suggest, imaging, the accelerator science and technology, beam therapies is another angle, obviously our computers. At the end of the day, what we bring that almost no other agency brings, I'll just say what I said in my statement, is science at scale. Our ability to do these big things. NIH is a phenomenal resource for the country, but they're focused largely on individual investigators across the country, and even at their institutes, we bring the big machines and the know-how of how to work in very large teams to do things like the Human Genome Project, right? Yes. That was a partnership with the National Institutes of Health. We're, in addition to this topic-by-topic collaboration, we're in discussion with NIH leadership now about what that next moonshot should be. It might be antimicrobial resistance, as was talked about in your hearing. It could be mapping the brain as well. We're going to leave it to the National Institutes of Health to decide what their priority huge projects are, but we're standing by to work with them with our light sources and other factory science, if you will, with our supercomputers and our data handling to attack the problem that, you know, they lead on and we identify as something that's mutually, what is the next Human Genome Project is the question, in addition to the routine collaboration we're doing across these areas, including drug discovery and cancer therapies and so forth.
I'm going to say something that is in order, but probably a little bit unusual. There isn't a sheriff that I meet with, or recently because of this COVID-19, many of our county health department directors in my part of the country, when I say to them, okay, so what's at the top of the list? And they say at the top of the list is mental illness, at the top of the list. And because we've moved from the 70s and 80s of having people in state institutions to deinstitutionalizing, and now our prisons have become the chief domiciliary for those who are so sick. And it's been interesting to talk to some of our colleagues. Congressman Gonzalez of Ohio was very interested in the human brain because of his experience in football with a lot of his colleagues and what's happened to them. And there's a brain center at, I think it is Boston University, where a lot of individuals who've died from professional football, their craniums are taken after they pass. And I was looking at what they have, and I thought, boy, if you could get that on computers. And they're beginning to do cross-sections of the brain and look at what's really happened for the onset of all kinds of illnesses that they don't completely understand. There's a doctor, I have to remember his name. He runs the Stanley Institute, I think it's called. And he began measuring the craniums and looking at what was happening with individuals who had bipolar and illnesses that we give a name to but we really don't understand, like schizophrenia. And I think with your supercomputing capacity and with the interest of a number of members, we have Congresswoman Annie Custer, who heads a working group, another one, Congresswoman Grace Napolitano. We know we're dealing with something we don't completely understand, but I think what you have, whether it's the ability to finely measure distances within the cranium, to take a look at the electronics of the brain, to think about the work that I've seen happening at some of the labs where, oh my goodness, the imaging is so granular that you can see things that others don't. I think you have something there that might take on a set of illnesses that, by the way, cost us billions of dollars annually simply because we don't know the answer. And perhaps aggregate data in a way that those scientists you talk about who work on an individual basis, they're not able to pull together a lot of information in this highly gray area of medical research. So, and also the way different medicines function, where those things register in the brain. Why do some medicines work? Why do others not work? Why do generics work in this patient but not in that patient? Why? I'm not sure that we can find that out on bench research. I think we have to have something else that happens, and I think you can bring it together. So I just urge you along those lines, just having had experience on the road in this job and seeing what we're dealing with. Right now, half of those who are addicted with opioids are mentally ill. So it gets all mixed into these other things that society experiences, and that is one area where we need enlightenment. And where you just might have something that we haven't looked at before. So I wanted to mention that. I also wanted to ask Mr. White, as a follow-up to Mr. Simpson's question on the schedules for cleanup, could you be more specific about long-term delays you would experience if the environmental management budget were to be enacted as proposed?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question. One example which relates to Mr. Simpson's district is the retrieval and eventual treatment and disposition of calcine waste. Our commitments related to that stretch out to 2035, but we could be doing research now that would enable us to make easier progress along that line in the out years. That sort of work would be some of the work that would have been deferred under the President's budget request.
Thank you. Dr. Janatowski, I was very interested. You said you had something to do with what's going on in the Salton Sea. You were the department, right?
No, I did a long time ago.
Long time ago.
Right. I financed and then sold a geothermal plant in the Salton Sea.
I saw several of them, and I was
It
told
was the
more.
Leathers plant, Leathers.
Okay, is it still functioning?
I don't know. It was a long time ago. I worked on it for Burlington Northern Railroad.
Where would I go to get the best scientific study one could find on the energy potential of the Salton Sea Bowl as the second lowest point in the United States?
Offhand, I don't know where you'd go, but I can get back to you on that.
All right, I would be really interested in that. There are at least 3 geothermal plants operating there now. I climbed one hill. They said, Congresswoman, you're standing on a volcano. I said, I don't want to be there. And what's going on under the soil? What is happening there? I would personally appreciate a briefing, or if there's papers I can read. But if I ever felt like I was in an energy bowl that I didn't completely understand, I know I was in it. The wind speed alone and the angle at which the sun met the horizon, met the hillsides and so forth. I just thought, what is this place? And I know it's the drainage bowl for the Imperial Valley, but I think it's something more. And I'd like to know from the energy standpoint, what could we maximize there? We were told by one person that one of the geothermal challenges that they have, and there were at least 3 geothermal sites that I saw, evidently when they go down and they try to probe, the metal that they use corrodes within 6 months, maybe 5 months. And one of the elements they're bringing up is lithium. And I said, oh, how much of that? Is the lithium experiment working? I don't know. So I'd be very interested if the department could collect information about the Salton Sea and perhaps share it.
Would be happy to.
All right, I thank you very much. On Portsmouth, Mr. White, I wanted to ask you, in May of last year, a possible radioactive contamination led the local community to close a school near the Portsmouth gaseous diffusion plant. You're very aware of that, so that the children wouldn't be exposed to possible contamination. What are the results of the latest air quality tests, including the results from any independent tests conducted?
Congresswoman, as you're aware, when we were notified of the potential concern by the school this past spring, we sent in a team of the world's best nuclear incident response personnel to sample the school, and then we had those samples analyzed by 2 of the best forensics laboratories in the Department of Energy. The sampling results indicated no radioactivity above background levels in the school. And we also provided those samples to the Ohio Department of Health, and their analysis of those samples was consistent with the analysis done by the department. We've also continued to do air monitoring, as we would always do around our sites, and for 2019, we've detected no transuranic contaminants in that air sample effort that we have ongoing. And in terms of a third-party sampling effort, we committed to the school and the local officials that we would fund an independent third-party sampling activity. That work to develop the sampling plan and the methodology with the local community is still ongoing, but I expect that to begin within the next few weeks.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. Chairwoman, if you want to see some real energy, come up to where I live, and you have a lot of geothermal because it used to be over the hot spot of Yellowstone. And Yellowstone is obviously a lot of geothermal there and all that type of thing. And if the caldera goes off in Yellowstone, I have like 4 minutes to kiss my rear end goodbye. So it's full of energy up there. But I do want to confirm what my good friend from Washington said. This is incredible to me when you look at the Richland operations down 35%, the Office of River Protection down 22%, Idaho down 40%, Oak Ridge down 42%. And the one really perplexing one is that the waste isolation plant is down 3.4%. Down $13.5 million. Where do we stand on the waste isolation plant, and where is it going to, and how is cutting their funding going to get them open quicker?
So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. Wipp, as you know, is a very important part of the the cleanup complex. It's also important not just for EM, but for the broader national security and science missions the department does. So this budget request protects and very much reflects a commitment to continue to invest not just in operations at Wipp, but also in the infrastructure. This year, we'll begin work on a utility shaft to increase our ability to do work there at Wipp. We're also continuing work on a safety significant confinement ventilation system that will also increase our ability to do work there. Those infrastructure upgrades should be in place in the 2022 timeframe if they stay on schedule. And I think that will set up Wipp for the decades to come for the department.
So you think we'll be back to full operations by?
Current schedules, assuming those projects stay online, the 2022 timeframe.
Okay, thank you. And I know you guys, all of you know that I'm not upset with you. I know that you support the president's budget, and that's kind of what you have to do, and you argue for it, and you go through OMB, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and whatever comes out, comes out. And I hope you know that, that both Republicans and Democrats are a little flustered by what's being proposed here, and hopefully this won't stand. And I, you know, Mr. Genatowski, I don't know whether to ask you any question or not, because I don't know if you're going to be here in 6 months after looking at the budget request that says, please close this down. But I've been trying to figure out where the people that propose this budget come from, what they're thinking in this kind of, you went through all of the neat things that are being done and research that is being done by Arpa-E, showed us some neat slides and all that kind of stuff. I guess my question would be, thinking from their point of view or from their mind, is why isn't the private sector doing that? Would any of that have been done by the private sector had Arpa-E not been in existence, or?
Well, the statute requires that we do something that's unlikely to be done by the private sector. I think all the projects I've examined, which are 330 we have going on, programs then projects, I don't think the private sector would have financed them. When I was in the finance business, I wouldn't have financed them. They have far too much risk, and the real risk is not whether or not the science is right or not, because I think the scientists kind of get it right. The real risk is what's the time frame from getting it right on the bench in the lab to being able to put EBITDA on your income statement to your shareholders. That's the real risk, and the risk is we're trying to ameliorate that by bringing the institutions in that run their own R&D research, large corporations that understand how to manage that and try to inform us, and we want them to say, well, and these are the things we just can't get to. Do you find it interesting? Can you get to it? So it's really a question more of, sometimes they don't work, sometimes they do work, that's R&D, but it's the time factor to money. Sometimes it'll be, how long did it take the internet to make money? 25 years? That's why I say we get our answers from the scientists, and then they have to report to us what they do for 5 years. But something that we may think is a commercial no success comes back 17 or 27 years later to roll back in and be a success. We just can't tell. And that's what keeps them out.
That's really the debate we have here in Congress. There will be some people that want to get rid of Arpa-E because they believe that, you know, the private sector ought to be doing all of this stuff. But and we have that debate in Congress. I think that's the proper role of government, is to do those things that need to be done, that show potential for moving us forward in science and technology and development in this country. That just wouldn't be done by the private sector because of the investment that it would take, and the return on your investment would be, you know, couldn't sell that to shareholders and stuff. And that's the important role I think that this plays. And it just, and I'll say it again, it just kind of is amazing to me that what we want to do in this budget is defund or reduce funding for things that are looking into the future, and defund those that are trying to take care of the problems of the past. It's just kind of a strange budget, but we'll work with you and we'll get it done. And I don't think you'll have to live with this budget, hopefully, because I know Chairwoman Capter is very interested in these programs, and so am I, and so is this full committee. So thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Newhouse?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the second round of questioning. Something on everybody's mind is we all did the corona bump when we run into each other today. Very awkward. I'm not used to that yet, and I hope I never get used to it. But that's certainly, you can't get through the day without talking about this and how we deal with it. And Mr. Fall, as Director of the Office of Science for DOE, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the role that the national labs maybe could be playing and are playing in this whole effort to counter the COVID-D or COVID-19 coronavirus. We're not supposed to say coronavirus anymore because of Mr. Calvert, but I'm aware, and in fact, I'm going to be going to Richland next week to the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, partly not just because it's in my district, but they are doing some things that are very, I think, potentially very important for this effort. As I understand, at the Environmental Molecular Science Laboratory, the EMSL, they are working on ways that they could assist in the, and I'm not a scientist, so excuse me for my stumbling through, but biomarker discovery efforts there that could be looking for signs of immune response in patients, antibodies that indicate that a patient is exposed even if they are asymptomatic. But it shows actively circulating viruses. So just a couple questions, and I'll let you expound because you're much more adverse to this. Is it true that current testing kits only identify whether a patient currently has an active virus versus someone who has previously been exposed? And how can these biomarkers assist with screening and testing? And then I'm also aware that PNNL's imaging capabilities could assist with the development of a vaccine. So do you know that, or could you speak to that potential as well?
Yes, sir. I don't know about the testing kits, actually. I'll get back to you on that. I don't know the details of what they
I may learn next week, so I'll be able to tell you.
That's right. But what I can say is that generally speaking, the paradigm for biomarkers is looking for derivative signs, if you will, biological signs of some underlying process, so that are maybe more accessible. Instead of having to take blood and do a blood test, you do a saliva test or maybe a skin test or something. This is the idea behind biomarkers. And absolutely, the Environmental Molecular Sciences Lab is positioned to do that work. As I mentioned earlier to the chairwoman, we have now organized this front door for the whole laboratory complex where questions like yours will put out to this committee of representatives for all the labs. And instead of, for example, going to, knocking on PNNL's door, we put it to the committee and find out actually which lab. We don't have a national biotechnology laboratory that can do this kind of thing. So this is sort of call it a virtual biotechnology laboratory where we have one front door and can reach out to all the capabilities of our laboratories. Pardon the third question, sir, was, yes, that's right.
The vaccine potential.
Yes, and of course, as you may know already, we have incredible capability in this country to rapidly develop candidate vaccines. PNNL could help with this. Our other laboratories could help with this. The trick for a vaccine is not development of it, and DARPA has been DARPA in particular has led efforts to quickly develop it's the clinical trials, and you can't at this point get around the idea that in order to safely roll out a vaccine to hundreds of millions or billions of people, you've got to do the clinical trials. Those take the time that Director Fauci has indicated, 12 to 18 months to get the clinical trials part done. I'd expect we'd have candidate vaccines very quickly through the existing programs that we already have.
To begin those trials.
That's right, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I think it's exciting that we have a lot of capability within the national lab system to be able to address something like this. So thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Congressman Newhouse. You remind me, in listening to Dr. Fall's answer there, that in this area of mental illness, I think a lot of the working groups that we have, and they're bipartisan, by the way, up here in Congress, you're talking about dozens of members who participate in these. It might be very helpful to you as you draw from your different scientific capabilities across the government and try to figure out how, where would you concentrate. It might be interesting for you to send somebody up here, and we'll gather some of those members. You can just listen to them based on what they've been struggling with, what they've been attempting to achieve from the standpoint of the law, and for them to hear more about the science and what your science capabilities are. Because I really think it's quite complex, and it probably involves biochemistry and supercomputing. It probably involves certain physical characteristics on occasion. I'm not sure all patients would demonstrate with that. But putting together sort of the data sets that exist and are scattered all over the place, you might actually be surprised at what you're able to do. I don't think anybody in the federal government's done that. We meet these different scientists that come up here, and I sort of feel like they have their hand on the tail of the dog. I keep thinking, okay, what's next here? How do we find all the pieces and fit them together? There are certain private labs that know a lot, that make medicine. I don't know what they know and what they don't know. They probably use your light labs. So I just think I view the research as scattered, and you might really have a powerful role to play in gathering some of that and posting it in some coherent manner. If you ever get a chance to go up to Walter Reed, there's an Intrepid Center up at Walter Reed, and it specifically tries to serve veterans who've had certain types of brain concussions and other onset illnesses during their military service. That is a very interesting place, and some of the various types of machines, imaging machines that they have there that I haven't seen anywhere else. Very fascinating, and sort of think about the work you've done with PET scans and other things that have come out of the labs, purposely or by accident, and capabilities that you have. There's just so much there. So I encourage you down those lines, and would welcome, to invite a bipartisan group of members to just give you some of their impressions based on what they know. I would hope you would be open to that.
Yes, ma'am, of course. And I'd be remiss if I didn't credit prior Secretary Perry for the work I think you're aware of with veterans and our supercomputers and TBI. Really led the way of the collaboration with the Veterans Administration on gathering these data, particular kind of data set, brain injury, and analyzing those on our supercomputers.
I think that was the last thing I talked with him about when I think he went out to California. I can't remember if he went to Boston. I think he was scheduled to go to Boston but didn't go. It'd be a shame if we had another doctor here, was Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, and he left Congress before he completed his work, but he was dead serious about this topic. And I just think we need to pick up the threads of this somehow and have it make more sense. And you have the ability with those light machines to understand, even with current medications or treatments that are out there, where that registers in the brain or the nervous system and why it works or why it doesn't work. So anyway, it would be a very interesting exploration. I have a final question, Dr. Fall. Your budget request would cut the Office of Science Workforce Development by 27%. Programs critical to bringing in new talent and your pipeline, really, for science, technology, engineering, and math. In the next 10 years, the number of STEM jobs will grow by 13% compared to 9% for non-STEM jobs. And given the current and future demand for STEM workforce and the shortages in qualified candidates, how do you justify cutting this program? And how is the Office of Science working with other programs throughout the department to develop and expand workforce programs to ensure we have the skilled workforce that will be needed in the future, including directly in your purview?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. If I could just give you a little bit of context. In fact, we are proposing to reduce the WDTS, as we call it, the Workforce Development for Teachers and Students program. But I need to emphasize that that is actually a relatively tiny program in the context of our budget that's focused on some particular boutique fellowship programs that could be scaled up or scaled down according to the budget. I think it's important to understand that the vast majority of the STEM work that we do So a couple of tens of millions for the WDTS, a few $1 billion in research expenditures. The vast majority of the students we train in STEM go through our grants program. A grant to a university pays for graduate students and postdoctoral fellows and even undergraduate students in laboratories. That's actually the much more important pipeline for student development is support through our billions of dollars of grant supports to the laboratory, to our laboratories and to universities. But granted, we are asking to reduce the WDTS particular program a little bit.
All right, well, I don't think we should cut anything having to do with workforce development, so we might try to fix this. And I wanted to thank Congressman Simpson. I understand you have no further questions at this time. And Congressman Newhouse, no further questions. All right, we want to, that will conclude the hearing this afternoon, and I want to thank Misters Janatowski, Fall, and White for being with us all afternoon. I ask the witnesses to please ensure for our hearing record that questions for the record and any supporting information requested by the subcommittee are delivered in final form to us no later than 3 weeks from the time you receive them. And members who have additional questions for the record will have until the close of business this coming Monday to provide them to the subcommittee office. Our hearing is adjourned. Thank you all.